The scent of a wedding is distinct, a cloying perfume that masks the underlying rot of anxiety. It smells of expensive lilies, forcing this sweetness into the stagnant air. The nervous, acrid sweat of a groom who knows he is punching above his weight, and the burning ozone of hairspray holding 1,000 lies in place. For my son Lucas's wedding, the smell was money. My money. I sat in my wheelchair in the front row of the cathedral, a silent observer in a tuxedo that felt 2 sizes too big for my shrinking frame. I am Robert Sterling. For 50 years, I was an architect. I designed the skylines of Chicago and New York. I understand load-bearing walls. I understand tension and compression. I know that if the steel in the foundation is weak, the prettiest glass facade in the world won't stop the collapse. Looking at the altar, at the way the light filtered through the stained glass to illuminate the couple standing there, I saw a structure that was already leaning dangerously. Lucas was marrying Tanya, a woman young enough to be his daughter and sharp enough to cut diamond. She turned her head slightly, catching my eye, and offered a tight, practiced smile. It was Pa. It was a nickname she used to diminish me, to paint me as the harmless, senile relic in the corner. To them, I was the financier, the silent checkbook, the old man who needed to be wheeled out for photos to prove family unity, and then wheeled back into the shadows before he drooled on the silk tablecloths. They thought my silence was senility. They thought the blank look I often wore was the fog of dementia they were so eager, so desperate to diagnose me with. They didn't know about the hearing aids. My old ones were analog, fuzzy things that squealed if I hugged anyone and turned the world into a wash of static. But last week, I had visited a specialist, a friend from the old days who owed me a favor. He fitted me with the Phonak V90s. They were discreet, molded to the canal of my ear, and powerful. Bluetooth-enabled, noise-canceling, with a directional microphone range of 50 feet. I could hear the priest's wheezing breath. I could hear the rustle of silk in the choir loft 3 rows back. And most importantly, I could connect them directly to the voice memo app on my iPhone, which was currently recording in my breast pocket, the tiny red light covered by a silk handkerchief.
If you have ever been treated like a piece of furniture in a house you built, invisible to the people who owe you everything, you know the specific kind of rage that burns cold in the gut. It is a lonely, hollow feeling, watching the world move on without you while you are still breathing. Subscribe now, because I was about to find out that being invisible is the most dangerous superpower a man can have, and I intended to use it. The ceremony began. The organ swelled, a massive vibration that I felt in the titanium of my wheelchair. Tanya walked down the aisle, a vision in white lace that cost more than my first house. She reached the altar. She took Lucas's hands. The priest began the vows, his voice booming and resonant. Lucas and Tanya leaned in close, their heads bowed. To the congregation behind me, it looked like a moment of profound prayer, a private communion between lovers. It was a picture of devotion that would look beautiful in the wedding album. I tapped the setting on my phone screen, hidden in the folds of my cummerbund. I narrowed the directional microphone. The ambient noise of the church, the coughing, the shifting bodies, the distant traffic, fell away instantly. The world went silent, a vacuum of sound, except for the 2 voices directly in front of me. Tanya whispered. Her voice was crystal clear in my ear. It was devoid of love, devoid of nerves. It was the voice of a project manager asking if the permits had cleared. "Not yet," Lucas whispered back, keeping his head bowed reverently. "He's stubborn. He kept asking to read the fine print. But Dr. Eris is coming to the reception. We'll sedate him for the toast." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Sedate me. They were planning to drug me. "Make sure he does," Tanya hissed, a beatific smile plastered on her face for the photographer crouching in the aisle. "I can't stand the smell of him in the house anymore." "I do," Lucas said aloud to the priest, his voice trembling with false emotion. The betrayal hit me harder than the stroke I had suffered 2 years ago. This was my son, the boy I had taught to cast a fly rod, the man I had bailed out of 3 failed startups without a word of judgment. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively expediting my social execution. He was planning to drug me at his own wedding to steal my autonomy.
I sat there, frozen, as the applause washed over me like a physical blow. They kissed. They turned to the crowd, beaming. Lucas looked at me and winked, a loving, conspiratorial wink. I felt the vibration of the active recording on my phone against my chest. I had the evidence. The words were captured, but I needed more. I needed to understand the mechanics of their plan. I needed to see the blueprints of my own destruction. The reception was held at my estate, the sprawling Georgian manor on the lake that they planned to seize. It was a grotesque display of my own wealth being paraded in front of me. During the cocktail hour, while the guests were distracted by the open bar and the string quartet, I feigned fatigue. I slumped in my chair, letting my mouth hang open slightly. The nurse Tanya had hired, a severe woman named Nurse Ratchet in my mind, though her name was Brenda, marched over. I now suspected she was part of the scheme. She looked at me with undisguised annoyance. "Time for a rest, Mr. Sterling," she said, grabbing the handles of my chair without asking. "Library," I mumbled, slurping my words. "Quiet." She rolled her eyes, but wheeled me down the hall, away from the festivities. She pushed me into the library, parked me facing the window, and checked her watch. 20 minutes, she said. "Don't move." She left, closing the heavy oak door with a click. As soon as the latch engaged, I stood up. My legs were weak, yes. The atrophy of age is a cruel thief, but I wasn't an invalid. I wasn't the cripple they needed me to be. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk, the desk where I had drawn the plans for the Trade Center Annex, and steadied myself. I walked to the lever chair. I knew Lucas had been using my office as his staging ground. His briefcase, a sleek Italian leather number I had bought him for his promotion, was carelessly left behind the chair. I knelt, my knees protesting with sharp spikes of pain, and clicked the latches. It wasn't locked. Arrogance. He thought I couldn't walk, let alone snoop. I opened it. It was a manila folder, thick with paperwork. On top were pre-filled prescription pads signed by Dr. Eris. I squinted at the handwriting. Haloperidol, lorazepam, high-dose antipsychotics, drugs that would turn a sharp mind into mush, that would induce the very symptoms of dementia they claimed I had. The name sounded peaceful. The photos showed a sterile gray building with barred windows. I knew this place.
It was a state-run facility, 2 counties over, known for its Medicaid fraud and neglect violations. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. And at the bottom, the smoking gun. The power of attorney document. It was drafted to give Lucas total, unilateral control over the Sterling Empire, the estate, and my medical decisions, effective immediately upon a diagnosis of incapacity by a supervising physician. Dr. Eris. I took my phone out with trembling hands. I photographed everything, the prescriptions, the brochure, the contract. My hands shook so badly the first few were blurry, and I had to force myself to breathe, to find the stillness I used to summon when drawing a straight line. Click, click, click. I heard the door handle turn. Panic, cold and electric, shot through me. I threw the papers back into the briefcase. I snapped the lid shut. I lunged for the wheelchair, my foot catching on the rug. I fell into the seat just as the door opened. I slumped my head forward, letting my hands dangle loosely over the armrests, feigning a deep, comatose sleep. "Mister." The voice was a whisper. It wasn't Brenda. It wasn't Lucas. I opened one eye, peering through the slit of my lashes. It was James. James was my driver. He had been with me for 30 years. He was the man who drove me to the hospital when my wife died. He was the man who sat with me in silence when the house felt too big. Lucas had fired him 2 months ago for being too expensive and replaced him with a rideshare app account I couldn't figure out how to use. James was wearing a cheap suit, holding a glass of punch. He had snuck in. "Mister," he whispered again, crouching by my chair. "You look pale, sir." I opened my eyes fully. I looked at the weathered, honest face of the only man in the room, perhaps the only man in the world, who didn't want my money. "James," I whispered. He jumped. "Sir."
"Listen to me," I said, my voice gaining a razor edge. I gripped his wrist with a strength that surprised both of us. James looked at me, confusion warring with loyalty in his eyes. He saw the clarity in my gaze. He saw the architect, not the invalid. "I do, sir," he said. "I never gave it back. I figured." "Good man," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Don't leave. I need you to do something for me. I need you to retrieve something from my safe deposit box tomorrow morning." "Anything, mister?"
"And tonight," I said, looking toward the door where the sounds of the party were growing louder, the laughter of the vultures circling my legacy. "Tonight, I need you to stand guard by the punch bowl. Watch Dr. Eris. Watch Lucas." James nodded, his jaw setting. He didn't ask questions. He helped me straighten my tie. He wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. "I've got your back, boss," he said. "Then let's go," I said, settling back into the chair, adjusting the hidden microphone in my pocket. "The toasts are starting." James wheeled me out of the library and back into the lion's den. I saw Lucas across the room, holding a champagne flute, laughing with the doctor who was paid to destroy me. They looked confident. They looked victorious. But as James pushed me through the crowd, I touched the phone in my pocket. They thought they were burying a senile old man. They didn't realize they were burying a landmine, and I was about to step off the trigger. The champagne tasted like vinegar, or maybe that was just the bitterness of the occasion coating my tongue, turning every bubble into a tiny, bursting capsule of resentment. The wedding reception was a blur of forced smiles and the clinking of high-end crystal, a masquerade ball where the masks were the faces of loving family members, and the music was a dirge only I could hear. I played my part. I let Lucas wield me to the head table, my hands trembling in a performance I had perfected over months of observation. I let Tanya kiss my cheek, her perfume, a cloying, suffocating scent of jasmine and ambition, filling my nose and making my stomach turn. I watched the guests, friends I had known for decades, look at me with that specific blend of pity and dismissal reserved for the dying. But my eyes were sharp. They were tracking a predator. Dr. Eris was a slick man in a velvet dinner jacket that caught the ambient light like an oil slick. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't dancing. He was hovering near the head table, his eyes fixed on my water glass. I watched him slip a small, white packet from his pocket, his movements practiced and smooth, masking the action with a laugh directed at a bridesmaid. He reached for the pitcher. "Here, Mr. Sterling," he said, sliding the glass toward me a moment later. "Hydration is key at your age." I looked at the water. It was clear, innocent. It looked like life. I knew it was chemical restraint in liquid form.
"Thank you, doctor," I mumbled, letting my head loll slightly to the side. I reached for the glass. My hand shook violently, a tremor I summoned from the depths of my rage. I lifted it halfway to my mouth, watching Lucas watch me out of the corner of his eye. He was tense, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. He was waiting for the swallow. He was waiting for the problem to be solved. I let the glass slip. It hit the table edge and shattered, drenching the white tablecloth, the floral centerpiece, and Dr. Eris's velvet sleeve. I cried out, a sound of pathetic senility. "My hand!" The flash of irritation in Lucas's eyes was instantaneous and terrifying, a flare of pure hatred that vanished as quickly as it appeared, smoothed over into a mask of concern for the benefit of the watching guests. "It's okay, Dad," Lucas said through gritted teeth, signaling a waiter. "Accidents happen." "I'm so clumsy," I whispered. I saw Dr. Eris exchange a look with Tanya. It was a look of frustration. "Plan B failed," the look said. "We'll handle it tomorrow." I survived the night. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. James, faithful to his orders, stood by the punch bowl like a sentinel in a cheap suit, his eyes never leaving me. When the reception finally wound down and they wheeled me to the guest suite on the first floor because stairs were too dangerous for me, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the bass of the DJ fading out. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Adrenaline is a powerful stimulant, and I was running on a lethal dose of it. The real showdown was scheduled for the morning, the gift-opening brunch. Sunlight streamed into the sunroom with a cruelty that felt personal. It was harsh and revealing, exposing the dust motes in the air and the deep lines etched into my face. The room smelled of bacon, expensive coffee, and the stale alcohol sweating out of the pores of the hungover bridal party. It was an intimate affair, just the immediate family, the maid of honor, the best man, and Mr. Thorne, Lucas's personal lawyer, a man whose spine was as flexible as his ethics. They had set me up at the end of the table, facing the garden. The wheelchair felt like a cage this morning.
the metal cold against my legs through the thin fabric of my trousers. "Dad," Lucas said, pushing a plate of scrambled eggs and smoked salmon toward me. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, but there was a nervous energy vibrating off him. "Eat up."
Not hungry, I rasped. Stomach feels... You need your strength, Tanya chirped. She was wearing a silk kimono and sipping a mimosa, looking every inch the lady of the manor she believed she already was. We have a big day. And before we get to the fun stuff, Lucas added, casually sliding a stack of papers across the glass table, we have some boring administrative work. Just tax stuff for the wedding expenses. Vendor checks, caterers, that sort of thing. Mr. I looked at the stack. On top was a generic invoice for the florist. It looked legitimate, but the paper underneath was slightly offset. I could see the header peeking out. Durable power of attorney. And below that, petition for involuntary commitment. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They were relying on my blindness, my weakness, my trust. "Just sign here and here," Mr. Thorne said, clicking a heavy gold pen and holding it out to me. "I've tapped the pages for you, Robert." I didn't take the pen. I looked at Lucas. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo, the boy I had taught to read blueprints. I looked for a flicker of hesitation, a shadow of guilt. I found nothing but impatience. "I'm feeling a bit tired, Lucas," I said, letting my voice drop to a confused whisper. I raised a hand to my ear, fumbling with the volume dial of my hearing aid. My hearing, it's been acting up all morning. There's so much static. "It's probably the battery pops," Tanya said, dismissing me with a wave of her glass. "Just sign the papers, then you can go nap. We know you're exhausted. Dr. Eris mentioned last night that you were showing signs of..." Dr. Eris. I repeated the name slowly, tasting the syllables. The room was quiet, save for the clinking of silverware. "Yes," Lucas said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sudden, violent silence of a bomb that has just armed itself in a crowded room. The fork halfway to Lucas's mouth stopped. Tanya lowered her glass. Mr. Thorne froze, his hand hovering over the documents. Haloperidol? Lucas stammered, his face going slack. I don't know what you're talking about. Haloperidol? That's an antipsychotic. You're confused, Dad." I sat up straighter. The slump in my shoulders vanished. The tremor in my hand ceased. "I may be old, Lucas," I said, my voice gaining strength, shifting from the raspy whisper of an invalid to the baritone resonance of the man who used to command construction sites.
My legs may be tired, but my hearing, thanks to Swiss engineering and a very expensive upgrade you didn't know about. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out my iPhone. "Tanya!" asked, her voice tight. "I synced this to the room's Sonos system about an hour ago," I said calmly. I tapped the screen. Lucas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile. "I'm playing the toast I should have given yesterday," I said. I hit play. A screech of feedback whined through the ceiling speakers, a high-pitched electronic squeal that made everyone wince and cover their ears. And then the audio cut through the sunroom with terrifying, crystal-clear fidelity. It was the recording from the altar. The ambient noise of the church was gone, stripped away by the directional mic, leaving only the two voices whispering in the holy silence. Tanya's voice boomed from the speakers. It was ghostly, undeniable, dripping with venom. The real Tanya, standing in the sunroom, gasped. She dropped her mimosa. The flute shattered on the terracotta tiles, orange juice and champagne pooling around her expensive heels, but she didn't move. She stared at the ceiling as if God himself were speaking. "Not yet," Lucas's recorded voice replied, filling the room. "He's stubborn, but Dr. Eris is coming to the reception. We'll sedate him for the toast." Mr. Thorne, the lawyer, went pale. He snatched his hand back from the documents on the table as if they were burning. "Make sure he does," the recording continued, louder now. "I want him in the facility by Monday." I pressed stop. The echo of the words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The color drained from Lucas's face so fast he looked like he was going into shock. He looked at Tanya, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. "Dad," Lucas stammered, reaching a shaking hand toward the phone. That's AI. That's fake. You generated that. You're having a paranoid episode."
I roared. It wasn't the voice of a frail old man. It was a command. It was the voice of the architect who screamed over jackhammers and diesel engines. I gripped the arms of the wheelchair, and then I pushed. I stood up. I didn't wobble. I didn't shake. I stood to my full height, 6 feet and 2 inches of anger and dignity. I hadn't needed the chair for months, but it was a convenient way to be ignored, to be underestimated. Lucas stumbled back, hitting the edge of the table. You...
I can walk, I said, stepping toward him. I can hear. I picked up the stack of papers from the table. I ripped the invoice off the top, revealing the legal trap beneath. I held it up. I have the photos of the drugs in your briefcase, I said, walking toward Mr. Thorne. I have the emails you sent to the facility manager. I looked the lawyer in the eye. Mr. Thorne, I suggest you leave immediately. If you are still here in 60 seconds, I will consider you an accessory to conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted poisoning, and fraud. The lawyer didn't hesitate. He didn't look at Lucas. He didn't pack his papers. He grabbed his briefcase, shoved his chair back, and practically ran out the French doors into the garden without a single word. "Tanya!" shrieked. The shock had worn off, replaced by an ugly, panicked rage. Her face twisted, revealing the rot beneath the beauty. "We're married! We have rights! This is our house!" "This is my house," I corrected her, my voice cold as the stone floor. "I designed it. I poured the foundation. I paid for every single brick." I pulled a folded document from my inside pocket. "As of this morning, James is at the bank with a notarized document removing Lucas from the trust," I said. "And this is an eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." I tossed the paper onto the table, right into the puddle of spilled champagne. I looked at my son. I searched his face for the boy who used to draw pictures for me, the boy who cried when his goldfish died. I looked for the son I loved, but I only saw a stranger, a weak, greedy stranger, consumed by entitlement. "You wanted my legacy," I said softly, the anger fading into a deep, hollow sadness that hurt more than the rage. "You just earned it. You have nothing. No job at the firm, no trust fund, no house." I looked at the speakers where their voices had just played. "Dad, please," Lucas wept, falling to his knees in the broken glass and juice. It was a pathetic sight, a man stripped of his safety net. "I was pressured. It was her. She made me do it." "You love my checkbook," I said. I turned my back on them. "Robert!" Tanya screamed, lunging for me, but her heel slipped in the mess she had made, and she fell hard, screaming in frustration. I didn't stop. I walked out of the sunroom, my shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I walked past the terrified catering staff, who had heard everything.
I walked through the grand foyer, past the portraits of ancestors who would have been ashamed of what my lineage had become. I walked out onto the front veranda. James was there. He was standing by the open door of my vintage Rolls-Royce, the engine idling purr. He looked at me, standing tall, and a slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Where to, mister?" James asked. "The lake house, James," I said, taking a deep breath of the clean morning air. It smelled of rain and pine, not money and lies. "Take me somewhere quiet." I got into the car. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing me inside the leather cocoon of safety. As we pulled away, I watched the house in the rearview mirror. I saw Lucas running out the front door, shouting, waving his arms. He looked small. He looked insignificant. I reached up to my ears. One by one, I pulled the hearing aids out. I clicked them off. The world went silent. The shouting, the begging, the noise of betrayal. It all vanished. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I had heard enough truth to last me the rest of my life. Now I just wanted the peace I had paid for.